Good evening, guys. In the last class, we discussed about mainly three keywords. What are those three keywords? Try, catch, finally. We discussed about try keyword, catch keyword, and finally keyword. So, can you tell me what is the purpose of try? It is used to keep our risky code. It is used to keep our risky code. What is the purpose of catch? It is used to catch the exception. It is used to catch the exception occurred in try block. So if I want to write a catch block, then try block is mandatory. If I want to write the catch block, try block is mandatory. Then we discussed about finally block. What is the purpose of finally? To execute cleanup activities. So finally block will execute always, whether exception occur or whether exception did not occur, still my finally block is going to execute. If you want to execute some piece of code always, whether irrespective of the exception, if exception occurred or if exception don't occur, still I want to execute my logic, then I will go for finally block. Now here the combination try catch finally a valid combination, try catch valid combination, try finally valid combination, try multiple catches with finally also valid combination. Perfect. Next one, we have two more keywords in the exception handling. One is throw keyword, another one is throws keyword. One is a throw keyword, another one is throws keyword. Now, first let's understand what is throws. First let's understand what is throws. It is used to it is used to hand over it is used to hand over checked exceptions to caller. Okay, read the statement once again. It is used to hand over checked exceptions to caller method. It is used to hand over checked exceptions to caller method or JVM. What is the checked exception? The exception which identified at the compile time is called as checked exception. Any exception which can be identified by our compiler, that is called checked exception. Now I'm taking one class called public static void main. Okay. Now here I'm trying to create one object for file reader. File reader fr is equal to new file reader. I'm giving some file name. abc.txt. File may available or file may not available. When I am trying to read some data by using file reader, my compiler is telling that boss, check carefully, file not found exception may come if the file is not available. Compiler is giving a warning to me. Boss, you are trying to read a file by using file reader, but you check properly in that location file is available or not. So I'm getting a exception. What is this exception I'm getting? What is the exception I'm getting? Unhandled exception, file not found exception. So it is identified at the compile time. When it will occur? In the runtime. Exception is identified at the compile time. It will occur in the runtime. Any exception which identified at the compile time, which will occur in the runtime, that is called checked exception. When my program is having a checked exception, I don't want to handle. I am not interested to handle. I want to hand over that exception to caller method or JVM. So in order to use this, in order to hand over checked exception to caller method, we will go for throws keyword. I will tell to JVM, hey, I know you just shut up your mouth and compile my program. You just shut up your mouth and compile my program. I know about that. I know about that file not found exception. You just do compilation. That's it. You just do the compilation. I know whether file is not available or not available. I will take care of it. Up mera program compile karo. For that I am using throws file not found exception. Compiler is telling me there is a file not found exception. Am I handling that exception? I am ignoring that exception. I am ignoring that exception. That means I am handovering that exception to that caller method. Who is going to call this method? JVM. I am writing throws. I can say throws keyword is used to ignore checked exceptions. Throws keyword is used to ignore checked exception. So which exception it will ignore now? File not found. File not found. Compilation successful? Yes. Compilation successful. Run the program. When I run this program, what will happen? It will give runtime exception. What is that? Exception identified at the compile time. But did I handle that exception? I'm ignoring that exception. I'm ignoring that exception. How I am ignoring that exception? By using a keyword called throws. Throws file not found exception. I'm ignoring that exception by using throws keyword. I'm ignoring that exception by using throws keyword. Are you clear with this? Now I'm ignoring, but am I escaping from that exception, or it is occurring in the runtime? It is occurring in the runtime. In the runtime, I am getting java.io.file not found exception. Exception identified at the compile time, but it is occurring at the runtime. Now tell me, what is the purpose of throws? Which is used to hand over checked exceptions to caller method or JVM. I can say it is used to ignore. We can ignore checked exceptions. We can ignore checked exceptions using throws keyword. Using throws keyword. So this is an example for that. This is the example for that. I am having file reader. When I'm using a file reader, what is the meaning of that? It is used to read the data from a file. If a file available, I can read it. If a file not available, exception. File not found exception. That exception identified by the compiler, but I'm not interested to handle that exception. I'm ignoring that exception. For that, I will go for throws. For example, here I'm going to use one more statement. I'm going to use one more statement, class dot for name. There is a method available, class dot for name. My program compiled successfully, or it is failing? Failing. See the error? What is the error? Class not found exception. Can I say class not found exception is also compile time exception? Yes or no? When that exception is coming? Compile time. I'm not interested to handle. What I can do? I can do throws file not found, comma, class not found exception. I'm throwing through it. I'm ignoring through two exceptions. One is file not found, another one is class not found. Instead of doing two exceptions like this, can I declare super class exception? Yes. If I declare super class exception, what is the advantage? It can ignore all the checked exceptions. If you want to ignore all checked exceptions, we can go for a keyword called throws keyword. Throws keyword is used to ignore all checked exceptions. All checked exceptions, right? Like this also you can ignore. We can ignore all checked exceptions like below. We can ignore all checked exceptions like below. Instead of giving particular exception, I'm giving exception. What is exception? It is a super class for all the exceptions available in the Java. So now you can write anything. Class not found exception will come here. File not found exception will come here. Both are identified at the compile time. I want to ignore both exceptions. That's why I'm going for throws. So tell me, what is the purpose of throws? Throws is used to ignore checked exceptions. All right. Next one, throw. Throw keyword is available. Throw keyword is used to throw the exception wantedly. I want to throw some exception wantedly. For that, we will go for throw keyword. Throw keyword is used to throw our own exception. It is used to throw exceptions programmatically. Programmatically, I want to throw the exception. When my logic is executing, I want to throw the exception. For example, I'm writing one method, public public string get name. I'm passing ID. Public string get name. I'm passing ID. Now I will do if ID is equals to 100. If ID equals to 100, I will return name as Raju. Okay. Else if ID double equals to 101, I will return name as some value. Okay. Now else I have only two usernames. If it is 100, I will return Raju. If it is 101, I will return Rani. If you pass any other value, I want to throw the exception no data found, no name available. I don't have that username. Are you getting my point? If you call my method with 100, it will give you Raju as the output. If you call my method with 101, it will give Rani as output. If you call my method with 200, I want to throw the exception. Are you guys getting my point? So programmatically, I want to throw the exception in some scenarios. In some scenarios, you want to retrieve some data from the database by using some ID. With the given ID, data not available. If you give valid ID, I can give the data. If you give invalid ID, I want to throw the exception. It is a problem. You are giving invalid input. When you give invalid input for my method, I want to throw the exception. So how can we throw the exception? Which keyword is available to throw the exception? To throw the exception, we have a keyword called throw keyword. What is the purpose of throw keyword? Throw keyword is used to throw exceptions programmatically. It is used to throw the exception programmatically. Now, I want to throw the exception. New exception. Throw new exception. No name found. Name not found. Name not found. Are you guys getting my point? So what I am doing here, I am throwing the exception. Why I am throwing the exception? You are passing invalid ID. You are passing invalid ID. With the given ID, I don't have the data. In that scenario, I will throw the exception. Now, when I am trying to throw the exception, compiler telling me, boss, exception will come there. I know that because I am only throwing that. So what my compiler is telling now? Boss, in that line, exception will come. But as a programmer, I am only throwing that exception. Hey, compiler, I know that. I know that. Just ignore it. How can I tell to compiler to ignore that? Here I am going to specify throws exception. Tell me, what is the difference between throws and throw? What is the difference between throws and throw? Throws is used to ignore the exception. Throw is used to create our own exception. Programmatically, in some scenarios, we need to handle the exception. In some scenarios, we need to create the exception. When we need to handle the exception, when we need to handle the exception, when we need to create the exception. Simple example, man. Doctors will be available in the hospital. If you have some damage for your hand, if there is a wound for your hand, then what they will do? They will give the treatment. Okay. completely your hand is damaged, then they will cut your hand. Yes or no? So two types of treatments will be there, right? When you go for a doctor, if there is some problem for your finger, then they will do the treatment. If your hand is completely damaged, then they will cut that hand. So sometimes they will do the treatment, sometimes they will do the cuttings also based on the situation. Similarly, as a programmer, sometimes we need to make sure there are no exceptions in the program. Sometimes we need to create the exception. In some scenarios, we need to handle the exception. In some scenarios, we need to create the exception. When we need to create the exception, when we need to handle the exception, when we receive some invalid input, we need to throw the exception. When we give the valid input, when we need to handle the exception. When you receive valid input, you need to make sure your program is executed successfully, your program is terminated gracefully. If a user is giving valid input for your program, then you need to achieve graceful termination. If a user is giving invalid input, then we need to throw the exception. I need to tell that boss, it is an invalid input. I don't have the data for your input. For that, here I am going to throw the exception. What is the purpose of throw? What is the purpose of throw? Throw is a keyword which is used to throw the exception. Throw is a keyword which is used to throw the exception. What is the purpose of throws? Throws is used to ignore checked exception. What is a checked exception? Sit properly. ऐसा ऐसा सीना है तो आपको नींद आ जाएगा भाई. You are keeping your head on that wall. No, if you keep like that, आराम से you are ready to sleep. Keep straight. Keep straight. ऐसा. हाँ. Right. Fine. So we are trying to understand what is the difference between throws keyword and throw keyword. What is the difference between throws keyword and throw keyword? Throws is used to ignore the checked exception. Throw is used to create the exception. Right. Right. So it is used to throw exceptions programmatically. I can say throw keyword is used to create the exception. Create the exception. What is the syntax to create the exception? What is the syntax? Throw. Exception means a class. I need to create the object. How to create the object for a class? To create the object for a class, we'll go for new. Throw new. I'm going to give exception. Here I will specify whatever you want. Message. Why you are throwing that exception, you need to specify. Now I'm trying to create an exception, but what my compiler is telling, boss, you may get the exception, please be careful. I know that. That's why I'm ignoring that exception. Throws keyword is used to ignore. Throw keyword is used to create the exception. Got it? Fine. Good. So yeah. Conditional basis, right? Conditional basis. So whenever you are going to return, if I write it here, that should be the last statement. But return, I am writing conditionally. Compiler don't know which statement will execute in the runtime. Here, if is having some if is a condition, if a condition satisfy, this return will execute. If it is not satisfied, it will check this. If it is satisfied, it will return this. If it is not satisfied, it will go to else. In the else, I am throwing the exception. That means I am terminating that method. Whenever exception occurs, method will be terminated abnormally. Got it? Yep. Now I want to call this method. This method is a static method or this method is an instance method? Instance method. Tell me how to call the instance methods. We need to call the instance method by using object. Demo d is equal to new demo. Demo d is equal to new demo. All right. Now here d dot get a name. I'm passing 101. I'm passing 101. What is the return type of the method? String. So that method is returning some value. Can I hold that value into a variable? Yes. How can I hold into a variable? String name. String name. Okay. Here is there na? Name. System.out.println of name. I'm writing a method. Inside the method, I'm having some logic. Inside the method, I'm having some logic. Now, if I run this program, what is the output? If I run this program, what is the output? Rani. Run this program, Rani. Okay. Method is returning some value or not? Yes, method is returning some value. Is exception occurring in the program? Exception not occurring in the program? Exception not occurring in the program. Why the exception not occurring in the program? Why exception not occurring in the program? Input is valid. So if condition it is checking not satisfied, else condition it is checking satisfied, it is returning Rani. Is it going to the last else? No. Condition satisfied. Fine. Now let me call this method d dot get name of 200. D dot get name of 200. What is the return type of this method? String. Can I store that into a variable? String name. Okay. Now I'm going to print that name 1. Now tell me, when this line is executed, what will happen? Here, when this line is executed, it will call this method. In this method, I have some logic. To call the method is having a parameter. I'm passing some input for the method. I'm passing some input for the method. ID. ID is equal to 100. Condition satisfied or not satisfied? Not satisfied. Else if condition satisfied or not satisfied? Not satisfied. Then it will go to else block. In the else block is what is the logic? Throw. What is the meaning of throw? Creating the exception. Why I am creating the exception? Invalid in simple, and go to our website. Okay. Login. Go to website. Login. Give incorrect mail ID. Click on login. What happened? That means exception occurred. Why exception occurred? User is giving invalid input. If a user is giving valid input and click on login, it will execute successfully. I am able to log in. It executed successfully. I'm able to log in. Now, when I give invalid input, now I'm giving invalid mail ID. Invalid mail ID, click on login. So that program is checking credentials are valid or not. Credentials are not valid. Then throw the exception, boss. Your data is invalid. Invalid credential. Am I doing the same thing in my program? Yes. If you give ID as 100, you will get Raju as the output. If you give ID as a 101, you will get Rani as the output. If you give anything other than 100 and 101, you will get the exception, name not found, or I can say invalid ID. I can say invalid ID. Message can be anything. Message can be anything. Here, I am creating the exception wantedly based on some condition. Now, here, first 17th line, d dot get name with 101. I'm calling the get name method with 101. Then what will happen? That 101 will store into ID. If ID is equal to 100, Raju. If ID is equal to 101, Rani. Else exception. 100, 101, Rani is the output. Now get name of 200. When I call method with 200 as the input, 200 will go as a method parameter. First condition will fail. Second condition also will fail. Directly it will go to else. In the else what I am doing? I am creating the exception. I am throwing the exception. I am throwing the exception to my caller method. Who is calling that method? Main method. Main method. I'm throwing that exception to main method. Is the main method handling that exception? Main method not handling the exception? It is ignoring the exception. Then it will go to JVM. If you don't handle the exception, then it will go to JVM. Are you able to follow this? Now, JVM will receive that exception. JVM will understand what is the problem. That problem it will print on the console. Now, execute this program. What happened? First method executed, run is the output. Second method called invalid ID. My program is executed. My program is throwing the exception. That exception is invalid ID. Why we got the exception in the program? Because we are passing invalid ID. This is called exception stack trace. This is called exception stack trace. What is the meaning of exception stack trace? Exception stack trace is nothing but information about the exception. In which class, in which method, in which line we got the exception. See, I got java.long.exception. Exception message is invalid ID. In demo.java line number 11, get name method. What is the get name? That is the method which got the exception. Who called that method? Who is the reason for that method? Main method. Main method called that method. That method has given the exception. So it is printing the method hierarchy also. We executed the program from the main method. Main method called the get name method. Get name method got the exception. That exception is printing. So here always we need to troubleshoot the exception from bottom to top. We need to troubleshoot the exception from bottom to top. That is called root cause of the problem. So why this exception comes? If I don't execute the program, exception will not come. I have executed, I got the exception. From where it started the execution? Main method. Main method called get called the method. Because of that method call, I got the exception. If I don't call, I will not get that. So root cause, exception stack trace. Who is printing exception stack trace? JVM is printing exception stack trace for us. JVM is printing exception stack trace for us. Perfect. Now, so when I run this program, I'm getting that exception. When I execute first method, first time, I got the output. When I execute second time, I'm getting the exception. So I'm using throw keyword. What is the purpose of throw? Throw keyword is used to create the exception programmatically. Based on some scenario, we are going to create the exception. Are you able to follow this? Yep. So with this, we understood all the 5 keywords, right? Try, catch, finally, throw, and throws, right? Throws and throw or throw and throws, anything is fine. What is this? Throws. What is the purpose of throws? It is used to ignore. It is used to ignore checked exception. What is the purpose of throw? It is used to create the exception. What is finally? Finally is used to execute some cleanup code. Irrespective of the exception, I want to execute some logic, then I will go for finally block. What is a catch? What is a catch? Catch is used to catch the exception. What is a try? To keep some risky code. Good. With this, we understood how to handle exceptions in Java. Right. What is the exception? Come on, guys. Unexpected, unwanted situation in the program execution is called as exception. Whenever exception occur, our program will terminate abnormally. But as a programmer, we need to handle the exception and we need to achieve graceful termination. We need to handle the exception and we need to achieve graceful termination. To achieve the graceful termination, we need to handle the exceptions. Before going to handle the exception, first we need to understand how many types of exceptions are available. So there are two types of exceptions. What are those? Checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. For both checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions, superclass is the exception. For exception, superclass is the throwable. For throwable, superclass is the object. So that hierarchy we need to remember. That hierarchy we need to remember. Here I have two types of exceptions. First one is checked exceptions. First one is checked exceptions and second one is unchecked exception. Checked exceptions available and unchecked exceptions available. For these checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions, there is a parent class. What is that parent? Parent is the exception. Exception is a predefined class in the lang package. It is a parent for all the checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. For exception, there is a parent class that is called throwable. That is called throwable. Throwable. Throwable is going to act as a parent class for exception. From throwable, exception is extending the properties. From the exception, checked exceptions are available and unchecked exceptions are available. Throwable is having one more child that is called error. What is the difference between exception and error? The difference between exception and error, exception can be handled, error cannot be handled. Throwable is a predefined class in the lang package. For throwable, there is a super class. What is that class? Java.lang.object. Java.lang.object is a default super class for every Java class, for all the Java classes. Object class properties inheriting by throwable. Throwable properties inheriting by exception and error. Here, checked exception, unchecked exception. Checked exception means it will be identified by compiler, will occur in the runtime. Unchecked exception means will occur in the runtime. Can you tell me example for checked exception? Checked exception. IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception. Those are called SQL exception. Those are called checked exception. That means compiler will identify them. Compiler will inform you, boss, you are dealing with some functionality. You may get exception in the runtime. Be careful. Be careful. But I don't want to bother about them. I want to ignore. I want to ignore. Then which keyword I want to use to ignore them? To ignore the exception, I'm going to use a keyword called throws keyword. Suppose I want to create exception. I want to create, when user is giving invalid data, I want to create the exception. I need to tell the user, you are doing a mistake. I want to stop my program because to continue, there is no valid data. If you, simple example, I want to book, you want to book your train ticket. To book your train ticket, you are sending your name, your father name, his father name, his father name. Any use? No use. If I want to book a ticket, what I need? Your details, your journey details, from where to where, date, time, bus number or train number or flight number. I need that data to book a ticket. But you are giving invalid data. When you are giving some invalid data, is there any use of running my code? Is there any use of running my code if you are giving some invalid data? क्या हो रहा भाई? कुछ ghost आया क्या? कांचना, कांचना, ठीक है. Yes, sir. Today I roamed in whole Amirpet to find a classroom for our advanced Java. I have seen two to three rooms I have seen in Amirpet today. So tomorrow I will need to discuss with that owners, rent, advance, kuch baat karna padega. Then we will shift the classroom if the discussion is successful. 150 capacity is there. Huh? But nice. Suppose I'm checking multiple options. First option we have ये सब कुछ निकालना पड़ेगा. हाँ, this I have to remove. Second option I need to change the classroom. Yeah. In the Amirpet only, in that main road. In that main road. Now this much crowd we have not seen in the last 4 or 5 years in the Amirpet. In the last 4 or 5 years also we have not seen this much crowd in the Amirpet. No hostels are available. No seats in the hostels. No vacancies, no classrooms, no buildings, no offices, nothing is there. Everything is full. And now if we are asking a building for rent, owners are asking 1 year advance. That means 10 lakh rupees we need to pay as a advance. To buy they are asking crores. I mean do you think that anybody will sell a property in this area? Why? If they buy property one time money, if they don't buy every month money, every month. And I'm feeling that next year instead of institute, if we start a hostel, we will get more money. Very profitable business. No need to shout, no throat pain, nothing, no tension, nothing. That is good business in Amirpet now. Good. Yeah. So we are trying to understand. What is hierarchy for the exceptions, right? So the hierarchy for the exception, java.lang.object, that is the topmost superclass in the Java. From that object class, throwable class is extending the properties. Throwable is the topmost class in the exceptions. So when we talk about exception, we need to talk about throwable. Throwable is a superclass for all the exceptions and errors in the Java. From the throwable, exception is there, error is there. Exception means we can handle, error means we cannot handle. In the exception, there are two types. One is a checked exception, another one is unchecked exception. Checked exception means compile time. Unchecked exception means run time. Can you tell me some examples for checked exceptions? Yes, IO exception is a checked exception. Okay, file not found exception is a checked exception. File not found exception, class not found exception, SQL exception. These all are checked exceptions. Now, which exceptions comes under unchecked exceptions? Null pointer exception comes under. Null pointer exception comes under unchecked exception. Arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception comes under unchecked exception. And runtime exception, array index out of bound. Array index out of bound exception. Array index out of bound exception also comes under unchecked. Why array index out of bound exception is the unchecked exception? It will occur in the runtime. When you will get array index out of bound exception? When you will get array index out of bound exception? If you are trying to store the value in the array whose index is not available, or you are trying to access the element from the array whose index is not available, then you will get array index out of bound exception. When I will get array negative size exception? When I will get a negative size exception? If I give array size as a negative number. If I give array size as a negative number. See, I'm going for creating one array. Remove all this now. Okay. Now see, integer I is equal to new integer of -3. -3. Compiler telling me any problem? No. Why? Compiler is thinking that it is valid. Compiler what it will check? Size should be int value. Right. What compiler will check now? -3 is an integer or not? Int means it can be a positive number, it can be a negative number. So syntactically it is valid. Logically it is invalid. Getting my point? Syntactically it is valid. Logically it is invalid. Compiler is checking array size should be integer. Array size should be integer. If I give array size like this, invalid. Error. Why error? I cannot create array with double size. I need to create array with the int size. Int means a number. Number can be a positive number or number can be a negative number. I'm giving a negative value. Am I getting any compile time problem? No. Run this program. Now failed. What is that? Negative array size exception. Negative array size exception I am getting. Is it a unchecked exception or is it a checked exception? Checked or unchecked? Unchecked. Why it is called unchecked? It is occurring in the runtime. That exception is occurring in the runtime. That's why it is called as unchecked exception. Got my point? Yes. Look at the hierarchy. In the interview, they will ask, can you write down hierarchy of the exception in the Java? You should be able to draw this diagram. Huh? No, if you write the diagram, they will get clarity. आपको पता है. No. Program बंद हो जाएगा. If you get the error, your program will be stopped. You can't do anything. Sometimes in the interview, they may ask you, can you write a program which will give the error? Can you write a program which will give the error? Can we try? See carefully. I'm writing void m1. Okay. Now I'm writing void m2. Void m1, void m2. Both are instance method. Inside the m1, can I call m2? Inside the m2, can I call the m1? Then what will happen? Now here I am going to create the object for demo d is equal to new demo. I'm going to call d.m1. See here, I'm trying to call m1 method from the main method. So here my program execution will start from main method. When my program is starting from the main method, then what will happen? Come on, man. I'm trying to call the m1 method, d.m1. What m1 is doing? Calling m2. When the m2 is called, it will go to m2. What m2 is doing? Calling m1. It will call m1. What m1 is doing? Now run the program. Not exception, it is a error. Error. What is the error? Stack overflow error. Can I handle that? No. So in the interview, they may ask this question. Can you write a program which will give me the error? Okay. So write m1, m2. m1 calling m2, m2 calling m1. It will never come out. So it will give Stack Overflow error. So this is one of the example for the error. What is that error? Stack Overflow error. हाँ क्यों नहीं पूछते भाई? हाँ? Yes, we are getting Stack Overflow error. Why we are getting Stack Overflow error? Continuously my methods are calling that the stack is there now. In the Java JVM architecture we have a stack, right? What is that stack? What is that stack? Stack will store method execution data. Continuously my methods are executing. That is overflow. That is overflow. This is a error. Can we write a try catch block to handle this? Why not? Can we try? Can we try? Yes. Now here I'm calling the method. Here I'm calling the method system.out.println main method start. Here I'm saying that main method start. Here I'm saying that main method end. Main method start. Main method end. Run the program. Yes. See here program is executed successfully or program terminated abnormally. Terminated abnormally. Main method start. Is there any main method end? There is no main method end. Why there is no end for the main method? Abnormally it is terminated. So can I say this line of code is risky? Can I say this line of code is risky? Because I am calling M1. When I call M1, M1 calling M2. When I call M2, M2 calling M1, M1 calling M2, M2 calling M1. Continuously the calls are going to happen. Okay? Though two methods are available, those two methods are calling each other. Those two methods are calling each other. When the two methods called each other, the program will go to error. Stack Overflow error. Now let's try. I'm trying to keep try block. I'm trying to keep try block and I'm trying to keep catch block. I'm trying to keep catch block. Now inside this I'm keeping demo d is equal to new demo e dot print stack trace. So when I write that in the try block, when I write in the try block, tell this, execute this, is it terminating gracefully or it is terminating abnormally? Abnormally. You may think that, sir, your catch block is trying to catch the exception, but we are getting the error. Can we catch that error? Earlier, what I'm writing in the catch block? Earlier, I'm trying to catch the exception. But are we getting the exception? Are we getting the error? So which one we need to catch now? Error. So can I write here error? See, I'm writing the error. Now, when I write the error, what happened? Right? Main method end. Main method end. Now, here we are able to catch that error. Okay. Now, e dot print stack trace, but still what happened here? My program is terminated. My program is terminated. Instead of this, can we write throwable? Can we write throwable? Yes or no? What is a throwable? Right. Can I write a catch block with a throwable? Can I write a catch block with a throwable? Yes. Right. See here, I'm writing catch block with the throwable also. So here you can write exception or you can write error or you can write throwable. So this is one stack overflow. Stack overflow. Okay. Next one. Stack Overflow error we got. Stack Overflow error we got. Now tell me when we will get that Stack Overflow error, guys. When we will get the Stack Overflow error? Come on. When we will go for Stack Overflow error? When that method is calling that this is java.lang.stack overflow error. So here what it is saying that exception in thread main, that is stack overflow error. This is also one of the class name. This is also one of the exception class. This is also one of the exception class. We cannot call this as basically a error. Okay, this is one of the exception class whose name is Stack Overflow Error. What is the class name? Stack Overflow Error. In which package it is available? It is available in java.lang package. Let us go to java.lang package, that is JSE API. JSE API, go for java.lang. In this lang package, what are available? Interfaces are available, and classes are available, and enums are available, and exceptions are available, and errors are available. So it is coming under what? Error. Sorry, error. It is coming under error. Stack overflow error, out of memory error, no such method error, no such field error, like stack overflow error. So stack overflow error. Stack Overflow class available where? Java.lang.object is the super, then throwable is the super, error is the super, then virtual machine error, then Stack Overflow error. Stack Overflow error implementing which interface? Serializable. What is the serializable? Marker interface. It is marker interface. Now go here. Stack Overflow error. Constructors Stack Overflow error is available. Can you read this? Thrown when a Stack Overflow occurs because an application recurses too deeply. What is the meaning of recursion too deeply? Calling the methods repeatedly, then we are going to get this Stack Overflow error. Similar to this, what is available? Out of memory, no such method. Out of memory error, no such method error. Out of memory error. Out of memory error. And we have one more thing, that is called no such method error. No such field error. No such method error, no such field errors are available. Okay, so we are able to achieve the error by writing recursion calls. By writing recursion. M1 calling M2, M2 calling M1. Below program will give Stack Overflow error. Below program will give Stack Overflow error. Stack Overflow error. And there is a one more error called out of memory error. What is the meaning of out of memory error? Read this. Read this. What do you understand? What do you understand from this? What is the meaning of out of memory error? When we will get the out of memory error? So in the JVM, heap area completed. JVM is allocating the memory for the objects in the heap. When the heap area is full, there is no space to create the new object in the JVM. Then our program will give out of memory error. When you get out of memory error, can you handle that? No, we cannot handle. Why? Program will terminate. So if there is no space, how can you control that? You cannot control that. Good. So successful termination means whenever we get that exception, we can control that exceptions, right? But out of memory errors, some errors we cannot control. When you get out of memory error, there's nothing to execute. Program will stop there only. Few errors we cannot control, right? Good. So we understood what is exception handling and what are the keywords available in the exception handling? What is graceful termination and what is abnormal termination? What is graceful termination and what is abnormal termination? What is abnormal termination? If the program is stopped in the middle because of some problem, then that is called abnormal termination. So to handle, we have some keywords: try, catch, finally, throw, throws. Good. Next one. In the Java, there are so many exceptions are already available, like IO exception, file not found, class not found, null pointer, arithmetic, array index bound, array negative size exception. There are some errors also: stack overflow, out of memory, no such method error, no such field error, thread dead exception, thread dead error. Like that, there are so many errors also available. Fine. As of now, we are able to understand the predefined exceptions in the Java. We are able to understand predefined exceptions in the Java. Now, in some scenarios in the project, I want to create my own exception. I want to create my own exception. So that is called as user defined exception. What is that called, guys? User defined exception. What is the meaning of user defined exception? What is the meaning of user defined exceptions? Come on, guys. In Java language, we have several predefined exceptions. In Java language, we have several predefined exceptions. So what are those exceptions? Can you name them? Can you name them? IO exception, IO exception. Next one, file not found exception, file not found exception. Then we can go for class not found exception, and I can go for SQL exception. Okay, so IO exception, file not found exception, class not found exception, and I can go for arithmetic exception. And I will go for arithmetic exception, array negative size exception. What is that? Array negative size exception. And we will go for, come on, null, very famous, null pointer exception, null pointer exception. And there is an exception called class cast exception, etc. Like that, there are so many predefined exceptions are already available. But in some scenarios, I need to go for custom exception. You see, when you give invalid credential, my project is saying that invalid credentials, that is one exception, right? In the Java, do we have any exception called invalid credentials exception? No, that is my project requirement. That is my project requirement. And some example, if you go for training schedule, when you type some, 1 minute. When you type something, what it is saying that no matching records found. Do we have this kind of exceptions in the Java? No. So in the project, based on some scenarios, we need to create our own exception. So in the Java language, we have several predefined exceptions like below. In Java, we have several predefined exceptions. In Java language, we have several predefined exception based on project requirement. Based on project requirement, sometimes we need to create our own exceptions. Based on the project requirement, we need to create our own exceptions. Our own exceptions, those are called as user defined exceptions. What is the example? Invalid credentials. Invalid credentials exception. No records found exception. No records found exception. No data found exception. No data found exception. Invalid input exception. Invalid input exception. This is my requirement. Java don't know about them. Java provided some exception. If your requirement is satisfying with them, you can go for that. If your requirement is not satisfying with them, then you need to create your own exception. The process of creating our own exception is called as user defined exception. The process of creating our own exception is called as user defined exception. Now in the Java, you can use predefined exceptions and you can use user defined exceptions also. Now the question is how to create user defined exception. Now Java is already having several predefined exception. Now I want to create my own exception. I want to create my own exception. So to create our own exception, we need to extend the properties from exception class or runtime exception class. In the Java, there is a predefined class exception or runtime exception. If you want to create your own exception, you need to extend the properties from runtime exception. See this. To create our own exception, we need to extend the properties from runtime exception class. It is part of java.lang package. Go to JSC API. Go to JSC API. Okay. JSC API. Go to the package. What is that? Java.lang. Java.lang. Go to exceptions. Can you see? What is this, guys? Runtime exception. Open this. Runtime exception. Implementing. My God. See this. What is the meaning of that? Null pointer exception. Okay. Null pointer exception. Buffer overflow exception. Class cast exception. JM runtime exception. Incomplete annotation exception. Event exception. Cannot redo exception. Array store exception. Security exception. Wrong method type exception. System exception. Negative array size exception. No such element exception. What is these all exception classes are extending the properties from which class? Runtime exception. Runtime exception extending the properties from which class? Exception. Exception extending the properties from which class? Throwable. Throwable extending from which class? Object. Can you see the hierarchy? Class hierarchy. What this is? Runtime exception. Now inside this runtime exception, constructor 1, constructor 2, constructor 3, constructor 4, constructor 5. Can I call it as constructor overloading? Yes. What is constructor? Come on, man. Don't think that our oops completed. Don't think that oops completed. Oops will never complete. So in every concept, oops will be available, right? Are we using oops here? We are using classes, we are using objects, we are using inheritance, we are implementing interfaces. These all concepts are developed based on oops concepts only, right? So what is constructor? What is the purpose of constructor? Constructor is used to initialize the variables, instance variables. Basically, constructor is used to initialize instance variables. So, can I write two constructors in one class? Yes or no? Yes, we can write two constructors in one class. Then it is called as constructor overloading. We can write two constructors in one class, that is called as constructor overloading. Got my point? Yes. This Sunday, you people have a workshop on multi-threading. Okay. Karthik sir will take that class. So Sunday he will explain what is multi-threading. I will also explain in the class, but he is conducting a workshop for his batch students. You people also can participate in the workshop. Sunday 11 o'clock workshop is there on multi-threading. It will be there for 2 hours. You will understand what is multi-threading. So that is part of our core Java. I will also cover that in the class. But if you listen there and if you listen once again, you will get more clarity. That multi-threading is also very important for us. But online, sir. You want offline, huh? I will check with him if he is okay. I will ask him to. He will stay in Hyderabad only. Yeah, we will do that. I will do that. Assignments there na uska. He want me to write the code. Sunday I am also having one workshop, man. That is for DevOps people. Not only for DevOps, it is even for Java people also. I have workshop on Jenkins. Sunday I have workshop on Jenkins tool. 8 o'clock. CI/CD. Continuous integration and continuous deployment. How our projects will be delivered, how our projects will be deployed in the real time. That you people may not understand that, because to attend that workshop, AWS knowledge is required, Linux knowledge is required. So that is high level. Once you come to our module 3, then you can understand those concepts. Now you people need to attend this workshop on Sunday, multi-threading at 11 o'clock. My workshop is there at 8 o'clock. Just for time pass, if you want to listen, you can, but you may not understand that completely. Yeah, here you can access from here. Na? Register for demo. Directly if you click, it will go to the Zoom. Okay, yeah, where we are? User defined exceptions. It is used to create, but it needs some class to create. Na? This is our own class. There are 600 to 700 people are there in the Java project batch waiting for that workshop, right? So because for them the course is completing. And do you know, I'm teaching core Java almost after 2016. It's been almost 6 years. After 6 years, I'm teaching core Java. It is a refresh for me as well. When I was in other institute, I used to train the people on the core Java as a faculty there. Yes, now we are trying to understand what is user defined exception. So what is user defined exception? Come on guys, what is user defined exception? Based on project requirement, sometimes we need to create our own exceptions. So those are called as user. That means we will create our own exception class. In the Java, there are already some predefined exception classes available which we can use, and they will occur when you do some mistake in the program. When you do some mistake in the program, JVM will throw these exceptions. These are already available. But according to my project requirement, I need to create my own exception, right? So the process of creating our own exception is called as user defined exception. The process of creating our own exception is called as user defined exception. To create our own exceptions, we need to extend the properties from exception class. We need to extend from exception or runtime exception class. Anything is fine. Either you can extend from exception or you can extend from runtime exception. Runtime exception already extending from exception. All right. To create our own exception, we need to extend the properties from exception or runtime exception. Now, let me create my own exception, which is called no data found exception. Class, I'm writing a exception with a name called no data found exception. It is a normal Java class. It is a normal Java class. How to make this class as a exception class? Important. Runtime exception. Public class no data found exception extends runtime exception. Now, when I am throwing the exception, I want to throw exception with some message. Got my point? I want to throw the exception with some message. Here, I can create a constructor. Can I call it as a zero param constructor? Yes. Similarly, I'm going to write one more constructor, that is parameterized constructor. So can I call it as a constructor overloading? Writing a same constructor with different arguments is called as constructor overloading. Public no data found exception. This is zero param constructor and this is no data found exception. It is parameterized constructor. In this constructor, I can call super of message. What is the meaning of that? What is a super parent? That means, can I say I'm calling super class constructor? What is a super class for my class? Runtime. In the runtime exception, do we have a constructor with the string as a parameter? Yes, that is the second constructor. So what is the purpose of super? Super keyword is used to access our immediate parent properties. That can be a variable, that can be a method, that can be a constructor. Now, in my child class, I am writing super of message. What is the meaning? Accessing parent class constructor. Whenever I am throwing the exception, I want to pass the information to my parent class constructor. Boss, we got the error here. Whatever the error message is there, that error message I want to send to my parent class, which is runtime exception. Now, so with this we are able to create our own exception. Public class no data found exception extends runtime exception. No data found exception and no data found exception string message. So can I call this as a overloaded constructor? Yes. Inside this constructor I am calling super class constructor. Whenever you want to create user defined exception class, this is the process we will follow. This is the process we will follow to create one user defined exception. Getting? Yes. Public class no data found exception extends runtime exception. No data found exception, zero param constructor, parameterized constructor, super of message. Perfect. In the demo.java, I want to throw that exception. Same thing. I'm going to write one method. String get name based on ID. Get name based on ID. If ID is equal to some 100, then I will return some name. Okay. Else if ID double equals to 101, return some value. If ID not satisfied, I want to throw the exception. My own exception or predefined exception? My own exception, because it is no data found or it is invalid ID. Oh, how can we throw that? Throw. To throw the exception, what is the keyword? To, to throw the exception, there is a keyword called throw keyword is available. Throw. To create the exception, I have a class. I have my exception class. New, no, data found exception message. I will give it as invalid ID. So here I'm calling parameterized constructor to create the object. When I call this parameterized constructor, it is internally calling runtime exception constructor. That runtime exception constructor will give exception stack trace. It will give exception stack trace. Now run this program. I want to call this method. This method is an instance method. How can I call the instance method? How can I call the instance method? By creating object. Method is private. Can I access in the class? Private methods can be accessed within the class. How can we do that? Demo. D is equal to new demo. D dot. D dot. Come on. What is the method name, man? D dot get name. I'm passing 200. For 200, what will happen? It will throw the exception. Is it throwing predefined exception or user defined exception? It is throwing user defined exception. Am I handling that exception? I'm not handling that exception. I'm throwing here. Am I handling or I'm not handling? No. When you give invalid ID, I'm throwing the exception. My program will terminate abnormally. Run this. Yes. Are we getting the exception now? Which exception we are getting? No data found exception. Why we are getting no data found exception? Because of invalid ID. Right. So with this, we are able to understand how to create user defined exceptions also. Tell me, when to create user defined exception? When there is a requirement in the project, then we are going to create our user defined exceptions. Right. Huh. Throws. This is exception is a super exception, right? So compiler is recognizing that exception is coming. Here it is a custom exception. It will not give you. It is not a predefined. It is user defined. I'm wantedly I'm throwing that. Yeah. How I? Huh? If you print it, it will be like a output only. If you print it, it is just like a output only. I don't want to give the output. I want to tell you there is a problem. Yeah. If I just print output, it will become a normal termination. But here I want to terminate abnormally because there is a problem in the program. Yep. Repeat, please. Kya repeat karu? People are saying that why to throw the exception? Why don't you print the invalid ID? Right? Just I need to return. Sorry. Yeah. I need to return invalid ID. If I write like this, what is the problem? Program is terminating successfully, but I want to give you a feel that there is a problem in the program. When I want to give you feel that there is a problem in the program, then I need to throw the exception instead of just printing that. Okay, so that's why I'm not printing that. I am throwing the exception by using throw keyword. Then programmer will understand that whoever is going to call the method, they will understand that there is a problem in the execution. That problem is no data found problem. Why we are getting no data found exception? Because the ID we passed is invalid. So the programmer who is going to call my method, they will understand that they are passing invalid ID. They should not pass the invalid ID. Got it? Yes. Yes, guys, with this we understood what is exception handling. Right. Now, still it is not completed. We need to understand internals, how JVM is calling that method, what is the stack trace, when JVM will look for exception handling and all. That I will discuss in the tomorrow session. So please practice, try, catch, throw, finally, and practice how to create user defined exception and how to throw user defined exception. Tomorrow will be our last class on the exception handling. Tomorrow we will understand how internally JVM is handling these exceptions. Thank you guys. We'll continue in tomorrow's session.